Today, I'm beyond excited to welcome to the Marketing Mavens podcast, Mark Heaps. I first became aware of Mark's work about a year ago, and his approach to marketing, it immediately started to get my attention for good reason. I think his unique blend of reverence and creativity, it just cannot be ignored in the semiconductor industry. So I'm excited to get into how he and his team are shaking things up. Mark's led a dynamic career. He's been a technical writer and a graphic designer for large tech companies like Maxim Integrated and Apple. He's an Adobe certified expert who's also taught college level courses in graphic design. He's also been a leader at multiple creative agencies before founding an agency with his wife, Christina. And one of their clients was a name you might recognize, Jonathan Ross, the CEO of Groq. So over a couple of years of developing a relationship, Mark really had a front row seat to that vision that Jonathan has for transforming AI. So when he extended an opportunity for Mark to join Groq full time, it was a natural yes to work for such a passionate leader. Now Mark leads an amazing team of marketing professionals at Groq. He gets to leverage his expertise to bring the brand to life. And I think he's really impacting customers and communities worldwide, not just within the semiconductor industry. Mark, I'm pumped to have you join us. I know we're all looking forward to hearing your marketing insights. So without further ado, welcome.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here, and it's always a little bit hard hearing accolades. I would much rather be in the trenches doing the work, but if this helps some folks, I'm happy to share.
So indulge me. I love starting with this question because it really evokes some interesting stories. What is your earliest memory of marketing making an impact on your life?
I've tried thinking about this one before, right? I mean, I was a kid in the 80s, and I think 80s was kind of the turbo times for marketing. Everything was like, how sexy could you make it? How bombastic could you make it? Does it make you bigger? Does it make you faster? Does it make you stronger? Does it make you sexier? Whatever it was, the 80s was just all about that. And then we had this pivotal shift going into the 90s where it was all about expression. And suddenly you saw, those were the formative years for me. And that's where you really saw graphic design hit a new stride, where you had, people trying radical things with layout and advertising, and people trying completely different color schemas and different language. I think back to like the most mundane stuff that people would ignore today in advertising, but like famous campaigns for like Alka-Seltzer. I remember being a little kid and seeing ads and commercials for Alka-Seltzer. And there was a famous agency leader, one of the first female actually agency leaders ever in advertising history. And she was the copywriter for Alka-Seltzer. And her line that she wrote was, I think it was like plop, plop, fizz or something like that. And it was just expressive. And so I just think about that shift of when we went from the attitude of the 80s about being competitive and then getting into the expressiveness of the 90s. And obviously being a kid of the 80s, toy marketing in the 80s, you just don't see that today, right? Most things are digital. But I remember falling in love with Nerf. Nerf toys were just like amazing. They were so fun. I remember the advertising for BMX bikes. And if you had like a Murray versus a Huffy versus this other thing, branding at that time was really about establishing tribes. And like, are you a Nike kid or a Reebok kid? Are you a Nintendo kid, or are you an Atari kid or a Sega kid, right? Like, where did you fit? And so marketing was deeply tapping into your identity. And I think it was interesting to grow up around that. And then again, getting into the 90s where people were sort of a counterculture explosion, both in music and art and design, where people are like, hey, don't be the logo, don't be the brand, don't be the tribe. And so that stuff really, really stuck with me. And that's definitely a huge part of my background.
What an awesome walk down memory lane. That makes me nostalgic for those days where I would walk the aisles of the retail store looking at the Reebok pump sneaker,
Yeah,
just
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
wanting to own a pair of those
Well,
things.
the one thing I will say about that era that I recognized as I got older, because people didn't talk about marketing in everyday speak, right? That was kind of like a role, and it was sort of behind closed doors in these madmen sort of rooms. But if you look at the 80s, that's really when omni-channel and sort of multi-channel marketing became a thing. So if you think about that era, you might go see the movie E.T., but next week there were toys in the stores or Gremlins or these things, right? There was this connective tissue. Star Wars kind of launched that, and I'm a major Star Wars geek. And so you saw the toys connected to the characters. So there was a universe beyond even the movies that were made that they had to conceive to produce toys. And it was really interesting how, like, I remember He-Man and Masters of the Universe, they built those toys because they had comics that would go with the toys. And so there was this idea of multi-channel and how would you expand on the market opportunity through this multi-channel thinking. And remember, that's way before internet. That's way before most of the media outlets and channel outlets that we have today. So again, there was a lot that I learned just by noticing things during that era.
Well, I'm really glad that you brought up the importance of identity and tribe. That's going to be something we touch on a little bit later in our
Sure.
conversation with the work that you and your team are doing at Groq. So, do you mind giving us an overview of your career journey so far and kind of highlighting any of the key decisions and or relationships that ultimately led you to your current role at Groq?
I get asked this a lot, right? And for what it's worth, people get confused because they look into my background and they go, wait a minute, you were a designer, you've been a production artist, you've been like, pretty wide array of things. Um, why is it that you're sort of this brand marketing leader today? I'll call out just first and foremost, I was really lucky that as a kid, my dad had his own business. He actually owned a shipyard, and that was down in Louisiana, Mississippi area when I was real little. And so I grew up with a father who was a business leader. And I remember listening to him having conversations with people at the dinner table talking about how are we going to go into this market? Like, what are we going to do to compete with this other business? And this wasn't mainstream or consumer. This was industrial, maritime, naval architecture, building oil carriers and icebreakers and these crazy ships. But I was around business speak all the time. And when you take that and then you have a kid who's a skateboarder and into punk rock bands, there's this DIY ethos that's always surrounding you too. And so you learn to press your own shirts when you're in bands, and you learn to make your own skateboard decks. And my friends and I designed our own stickers and we sold them and we did things like that. And you just learn to cut your teeth on what worked and what didn't work, what sells and what doesn't sell. And that's not from the book, right? That's like trial and error. And that's why I love a lot of the ethos today of the developer community. There's a term that you'll hear many of them say, which is, build fast and break shit. And that's kind of become a similar ethos now coming back to the surface within the developer community around AI and semiconductor. So for me, that's a really natural fit. But yeah, the career path, I've kind of done it all. I went from being a guy who worked in the vinyl graphics industry when I was a kid, and I designed graphics for automotive applications. My first major trade show was at the SEMA Auto Show in Las Vegas. And I was literally applying vinyl to Tim Allen. He had that TV show, Tool Time or whatever. I did his car as a sponsor with AC Delco, designed it, applied the graphics to it, all the way up to designing restaurants. And I still do that today. That's one of those things that I kind of do in my personal time for, people in the restaurant community because I'm a diehard foodie. But then I was in Silicon Valley, and I made the jump to Silicon Valley because I called my brother and said, hey, I'm kind of finding things stale here. What should I do next? And this was the 90s. And he said, man, he's a mechanic. And he says, I don't know much about technology like you do, but these guys keep saying this internet thing is going to be huge. And it was a really funny moment, looking back to go, oh, the internet's going to be huge. But they didn't know. And he just said, hey, I think somebody who's he regularly called me a geek. And he would say, somebody that's going to be a geek like you, who's also creative, probably is going to do something cool out here with this. And that just led into all those opportunities with Maxim IC, and then again with Apple, and then working at Google. But each of those roles were very different. At Maxim, I was considered a publisher. And so everything from looking at the blue line and the plates for magazines, I did all the illustrations for magazine covers that were related to semiconductor and integrated circuits. And even that was really fun because I tried illustrating in ways to make them look like video games in the 80s. And I purposely wanted to break the convention of what I saw on all the other covers. And so it was always about just how do you make the brand stand apart, but not be too abrasive that people are offended by it. And so there was sort of a sensibility there. And then again, at Apple, I was a production artist. At Google, I actually oversaw the book project where we were scanning all of the world's books and making those available on Google Books. That was a deeply technical people leadership role where there was about 1,647 people in the program that we were leading. So, it has been an unconventional path into eventually becoming a marketing leader. But what I will say is the greatest marketing leaders I've respected actually have always had that diversity of background. In fact, there's a new marketing leader that's about to join Groq and is going to partner with me. And she has a background in computer sciences and actually has her degree in computer sciences, even though she's been a marketing leader for most of her career. So I think diversity is kind of that key. And then, as you mentioned during the introduction, when I met Jonathan, I just really felt this magnetism and gravity to the vision that he had and what he was trying to do with driving the cost of compute to zero, which is obviously our mission statement. This idea of AI for all, or making sure there isn't the haves and the have-nots. And to me, that really, I think, resonates all the way back to being that skater punk kid where like no one gets left out. So yeah, it's been really fun.
It's a great recap of an illustrious career so
Yeah,
far,
sorry, it was kind of
and
long.
I love it. And there's so much more to explore, but we'll save that for another time.
Sure.
I'm glad that you touched on your the early start into your career path in tech, Mark, because
Sure.
I think many people could consider that sort of behind the scenes work
Mm-hmm.
very almost like it exists in a brand vacuum, but you highlighted how you brought brand to life.
Yeah.
Even in those times where you were doing publishing and graphic design for companies like Maxim Integrated and Apple, even though Apple's incredible and
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
what we think of them today is not necessarily who and what they were back then.
No, very different.
What role did brand play in that work that you were doing?
I think the first thing is there's a psychology behind brand, right? And there's a behavior psychology behind brand. And you should act in the persona that you want to be known as, right? It's sort of that old ethos of like, actions speak louder than words. Jeff Bezos famously said that brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. I love that quote from him, but I actually like to modify it. My belief, and I teach everybody on my team this at Groq, and I just did a lunch and learn for the entire org about this. I said, brand isn't what people say about you when you're not in the room. Brand is what people feel about you when you're never present. And I think that's really key because every action you make creates an impression about how people will feel when your logo, your representation comes into their mind. And so, Jonathan did an interview actually this morning with Robert Scoble, and he's sort of a famous technologist. And he said before the interview, man, I'm hearing people on the streets of San Francisco. I'm overhearing them at the coffee shops talk about you guys. And that sounds exciting to the CEO, but Jonathan, but what I wanted to immediately know is how were they feeling? Like, what were they thinking and feeling about the brand? So whether you're the person that's doing the illustration, you're the person that's writing that copy, or you're the person that's standing on stage and evangelizing it, are you keeping the brand in your mind that you are representing? Right. And a lot of people disconnect from that when they do the work. They have the type of illustration or artwork they like to produce. They have the style of copy that they like to write. That's their personal methodology or their playbook for marketing. I throw all of that out of the window. Right. If you look at the Groq brand, and I love our brand, but our visual representation of our brand is not my personal aesthetic, right? My house doesn't look anything like that. But you have to separate yourself from that. And you have to say, who is this thing that we are representing? And then how do we fortify that? How do we strengthen that? How do we represent that in a way that when you're not in the room, people feel the way you hope that they're going to feel? And so for me, that's that big part of brand of like, it's almost like keeping it on your mind and ever present every time you're being strategic, every time you're building something.
You've highlighted some very important things to internalize for marketers about, bring creativity to the team and the table, but sometimes leave those misgivings about what you may not like about brand aside because there's a bigger vision going on.
There has to be. There absolutely has to be. And Jonathan has a very clear vision and some very clear ideologies around what Groq represents. And, what matters is, how do I bring that to life? And so one of the things that, just a very simple example from a marketing standpoint, he told me from day one, anybody that joins Groq will always be better the day after they join Groq. What can we do to help them be better in their life, in their career, in their skills? 100% they should move these 2 phases in their life, right? Well, then I'm going to try to figure out how to do that with the brand. I'm going to figure out how to do that with the marketing. And that means that, we're going to celebrate them. So you'll see us doing talent spotlights. You'll see the non-executives in the interviews. You'll see the engineers getting to do the spotlights. There's no hierarchy or title rank that earns you that privilege. It's, if you're passionate and you want that opportunity, we have a general channel in Slack and we tell people, hey, who wants to take this opportunity? And a few people will reach out and said, well, I'm nervous, but I'd like to. Well, we get them a speaker coach. We get them the support they need. We work on their slides with them. But that falls in line with his vision for the company culture. And ultimately, that's the foundation of what the brand is, right? So when you're a buyer and you're thinking about your account-based marketing, and this company comes in and says, okay, I'm looking into vendors that provide A, B, and C. A lot of the time, the tech might be good enough, but there's also a lot of the business world that says, who do I want to do business with? And that means, will I enjoy working with you as a vendor, as a provider, as a company? Now, imagine if you're the company they enjoy working with and you have the fastest performing technology on the planet. It's kind of a no-brainer, right? But it would be easy to skip on that human side, just be competitively fast. And then they go, well, yeah, you guys are fast, but we really like working with Bob over here because we've worked with Bob for 20 years. That legacy is hard to compete with. So you've got to be more than the tech. You've got to be more than the speeds and feeds about your technology. Otherwise, you don't win.
A little bit of a different question, but
Sure.
one that delves into your background. One more on this.
Sure.
And I think that this is very relevant because of how I've experienced you interacting in person and
Sure.
seeing you in video and things like that. But so you've been an educator in both the academic and the commercial setting. So what impact do you feel that experience has had on your ability to capture the attention of an audience, whether they're in front of you or you're thinking about them like externally?
Yeah, I jokingly tell people I was an accidental educator. I became a college professor and I was a professor for 7 years. I worked at an animation house. Actually, I was making cartoons, animation house called Spotbox. And the head of that animation studio in Santa Clara came to me one night and said, "You're the smartest guy I know in Photoshop and digital imaging." And I was in my early 20s. And he said, "The guy that teaches it at this campus just walked out and they need someone for the rest of the semester. Would you come in and take over this class?" And that night I literally went to tour and meet the head of the program. He walked out and he left me in the room with the students. And I don't like being uncomfortable and I don't like uncomfortable silence. So I said, "Hey guys, I don't know when they're coming back and I've never met y'all. What are you working on? And what are you stuck on?" And within 15 minutes, I grabbed a marker and I was on the whiteboard and I was explaining to people how to solve things that they were working on. What I learned through that, and this is going to be a bit of an abstract, but what I learned as a professor, teaching all the time, is every night, every semester, you have a curriculum that you're going to teach. You're going to learn your material and you're going to get to the point. I could deliver a Photoshop class right now. My brain would still be thinking about something else. It became muscle memory. When you get to the point where you can do things with muscle memory, then you can really get to a place where you refine it. So a lot of marketing people are trying to figure out, like, what do I want to say? And that's curriculum, right? That's covering the content. When you say, okay, now how do I want to say it? You should fail at saying it lots of times, lots and lots and lots and lots of times. So I did. And I tell people this is where good marketers can learn how data can be organic. And I'll give the example as a professor. If I didn't deliver well my lectures at the start of the week, and I used to do a quiz at the end of each week to see, how the students were doing. And I taught all kinds of classes. If I was off in the way that I presented at the beginning of the week, I could actually show you the data of how their grades went down from class to class to class to class. Same topic, same content, same material, same school, same program. But if I wasn't on point, the content didn't get sticky. If the content wasn't sticky, they didn't retain it. And if they didn't retain it, they couldn't reapply it in the quizzes and in the tests. So what I learned most from being a professor was that I need to find a way to make sure this material sticks with people. And I'll tell you, the core of that is being passionate. The core of that is caring about the audience, whether that's the students or your investor audience, or you're speaking at a massive conference like Adobe Max. If people don't first see that you care, they might not even attempt to engage and retain the information. So I learned really quickly that you have a responsibility and an impact as a representative of that material to others if you want them to retain it. Now, imagine you remove yourself from the equation and you're designing a campaign. You should ask yourself that same question. Is this going to be sticky? Is this going to help them get to the thing that they need to accomplish? And if you think that it's not, and you should test it and measure it, then that's the wrong methodology and you should try something completely different. So I've done all the terrible jokes. I've done all the weird things on stage. I've done all the weird things, whether that's teaching at a university in Santa Clara, or if I was speaking at some of the workshops that I taught for Dell or VMware or these other corporations. You really have to go in there and say, what's going to be sticky with this group? And there is no fast track to that. You have to go fail 1,000 times before you can get good at it. So if you're not willing to fail, you probably won't be a successful marketer.
Mark, I really respect that you shared about how you've pressure tested yourself over the years. I mean, that's a really cool, vivid story about just being thrown right into the deep end with the
It was
students. Wild. And that elemental truth about, is this going to be sticky? And, for marketers who are assessing that, can we take ourselves out of that equation and see the work for what it is oftentimes? That's going to be something I think on for a while. That's very resonant.
Yeah, I battle with folks on this all the time, because when they think, oh, I need to present information, let's just, talk about presentations for a second. They'll say, these are the 8 things that I need to say. And I always ask them the same question, well, why do you need to say those things? And they go, well, because that's what we're saying as the company. And I go, yeah, but will this audience care about that? And so we fall into these traps as marketers of like, this is the architecture, this is the narrative, this is the boilerplate. And I always tell people, try to get to the soul of the things that you want to say, but don't worry so much rigidly about the exact line and the exact script. Get to the soul of it and then ask yourself, why would this audience care about that? And so when I open presentations, a lot of time I don't start with introducing myself. People will notice with Jonathan, as we've been coaching him in presentations, he doesn't introduce himself at the start. He usually starts with a demo, because that's why people are there. They want to see if this thing is real. And so we tell them, don't worry about you. You're the CEO. Who cares? Show them the thing that they care about. And then you can introduce yourself, and then you can do something more. And so it really always has to come back to, it's not about you as the marketer, and it's not about your sort of boilerplate or blueprint that you've built for the company. It's the soul of the why. And if you can figure out what that is and how to express that to your audience, you'll probably be a lot more successful. Harder to measure, but you'll be more successful.
Well, I'd like to pivot off that.
Sure.
And, in some respects, I feel like you've taken us through answering this question, but a lot of people, for right or wrong, view the semiconductor industry and marketing in it as dry. Deeply technical audience, right? What's your view on that?
I'm going to be transparent, and I hope I don't offend any of the Groqsters that I know and love that work with us. But I swore after working at Maxim Integrated Circuits in my early 20s that I would never work anywhere near an integrated circuitry or semiconductor company ever again. In those early days, I found it soul sucking. As I identify as a professional creative, which is different than a creative professional. And it was so hard every week to go in there, and they would say, oh, we've got this magazine cover in South Korea or this one in Germany, and we're talking about this little thing of a chip, and it's got to be an amazing cover. And I would say, well, what would make it an amazing cover? And they would say, well, do an isometric view and put a couple stats above it and put a cool background on it. And you're like, that's it? It is really, really dry. And it's one of those things that you actually do see a lot of creativity in the semiconductor industry. And it took me a long time to learn this. Creativity is abundant everywhere. The problems that these engineers solve is nothing short of being art. It's magical what they are capable of doing. What I find in the semiconductor industry is very few people are expressive, and they don't take a position of expression in their marketing and in their branding, right? So we've all seen the semiconductor industry fall into the arms race. My thing weighs this much. Well, now mine weighs 2% less. Well, now mine weighs 4% less. Well, mine's now this much smaller. Well, now mine's this much. You just trade punches when you're doing that. So what do you remember? Right. And that's where expression becomes a very, very powerful tool. So the semiconductor industry has traditionally fallen onto this reliance of the CEOs to be the source of their expression. It's why Jensen from NVIDIA is so unbelievably popular. It's why Elon Musk is so unbelievably popular. Steve Jobs, right? These were expressive CEOs. And so they became the expression of the brand. And the rest of it was sort of the wake of their ship. But if you can bring expression into the branding, that's something that a lot of the drier folks involved in semiconductor aren't comfortable with, right? So I love that moment in Good Will Hunting, or not Good Will Hunting, sorry, my other favorite movie, Dead Poet Society, where Robin Williams is in the classroom and they all stand up on the desks and they start citing, the piece. That's an unbelievably powerful moment because it's expressive. Could you imagine going to a bunch of semiconductor engineers and expecting them to stand up and outlandishly start citing something? Of course not. They would never do that. I've never met any that would do that, right? They do care. They're deeply passionate and they want to win and they want to be successful and they want to change the world through their creation. But the safety is, let's talk about the specs. So as marketers, we have two challenges. Find the soul of your expression, and then secondarily, make everybody else feel comfortable with you taking that approach, right? And that's where the challenge in the semiconductor industry exists today. I'm very fortunate that I've earned respect with our engineers where they let me kind of try some wacky things. And then they let me do some crazy things like bringing a live llama to an event, or me dressing up in an inflated suit and walking around a trade show floor, or any number of, I mean, there's so many examples of like what people would say is stupid of what I've done. The difference is, and to earn that respect, you have to explain to them that if this thing goes sideways, you have a contingency plan. What are you going to do about it? So you can't just be crazy. That doesn't work. But if you have intention and you say, hey, I'm think I want to try this. Here's the 3 ways I think it could go. Here's what I'm going to do about each of them. And here's the levers I can pull to get that back to a track where we're all feel comfortable. If you don't have that, you are going to be trapped in that dryness of the semiconductor industry for a long time.
I really like that you highlighted the importance of honoring the work of your peer group, your
Yeah,
colleagues,
100%.
and hadn't occurred to me about the importance of having that contingency. So I'm glad you brought that to light. And kind of using that as a stepping stone, right? Like I have personally thought slash felt that Groq's marketing is disruptive, in some ways irreverent.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that you and your team have not totally turned marketing and semiconductor upside down to cause chaos, but you've at least tilted it on its side so that everyone can look at it from a different facet than ever before. Was this a calculated decision, or was it one that's kind of evolved over time?
It was always my decision to do that. In fact, I remember having a very deep debate with Jonathan. He's quite a reclusive guy. He kind of keeps to himself. So meeting somebody like me who says, "Hey, let's go splatter the walls with orange and let's go have fun," uh, that's not his space, right? But we had this long conversation. I actually have it written on my whiteboard over here on the side, um, and I wrote, I give you permission to be weird, Jonathan Ross. And I dated it February 22nd, 2021. And I wrote next to it, permission granted, all in. And that's always been at the anchor of like, how do we do things differently? And so one of the methodologies of that was at the time, and been a long time since I'd been around semiconductor exclusively. So I went to a couple trade shows, and what was everybody doing? Oh, here's your academic paper. Here's the charts and the templates or the tables and the power meter readings and all this stuff. All good stuff. And it's great for submitting for awards of papers, et cetera. And I just went, okay, so are we going to be another company that does that? Because there's no way you can stand out. And so I remember going to the team, the engineering team, and saying, hey, we need demos. Like, what can people actually do with our chip? What can they do with this powerful processor? And what makes them comfortable with shifting away from an incumbent, right? And they all said, oh, you don't really need the demo. Just explain to people it's this fast. And we fell back into that arms race trap. And I could not early on get them to give me a demo. And they're not software designers in the traditional sense of front-end software and tools and things like that. So what would the demo even be? And we had a lot of back and forth. And I could not win. And I finally said, okay, we're going to create our own event, which we called Groq Day. So that was a marketing strategic plan. And they said, well, what are you going to present? And I said, well, we're going to present as much as we can, but I want demos. And I started making that case to them saying, hey, do you want to do a slideshow with your tables and your charts? Or do you want to show someone running this thing? And suddenly that was a radical difference at that time. Like, we didn't see anybody doing that. NVIDIA does a bit of that with the applications, but they're so deeply established with CUDA and their developers. That's what you're competing against. And so I said, hey, I don't care if the demo is literally just code and terminal. Get me at least that. And then once I got that, I said, hey, next time I want this, and next time I want this. And I inched to where we are today, where we don't even build our own demos. The developers are building the demos on Groq, and we showcase and feature them, right? So this has always been by design from day one, that I first looked at the industry and said, how do I set us apart? And so we have two core beliefs in the brand and in the marketing. The first one is make it real, and I can certainly explain that. And the other part is keeping the soul of humanity in the company as an AI organization, right? The people are everything. The engineers are everything. What we do is because of a result of really hardworking people. So if you can take those two parts and put them together, I think you have something really special. And that's what we've been doing for 3 years. And finally, around November last year, I think you and I saw each other at Supercomputing. That's when the kindling started to catch spark, and it took those years to make that happen. We had moments, but then suddenly it really took off. And since then, now we've sort of blown things through every ceiling that we imagined.
I am curious to hear, in your view,
Sure.
what's the most successful, it doesn't have to be single activation, but activation that Groq has embarked on so far?
There's been a number of things. I mean, obviously you do trade show booths, you do these campaigns, you do all this stuff. But again, the core is make it real. So I've been preaching that for a long time. And then Jonathan came to me last year, a little bit late into summer, and he said, we've got to turn this up. Like, what's the next thing that we're going to do? And I said, well, we've got to make it more real. We've gotten to a place where we can give people access to demos at the trade show booths where they walk up and they can try Groq. I said, but like, we have to go beyond that. We need to be present for people to experience Groq. And so then we started building a cloud solution. And then, it's interesting because you think of building a cloud solution as a product first, but actually it really was this parallel of a marketing idea and a productization at the same time. And so then suddenly we gave people access wherever they were standing. And that kind of took things to another level. And then we built an API and we said, hey, now you can have access to that open source LLM and build what you want with it. But when we put Groq Chat first online and we were fielding that with a few people, that was working so well that Jonathan came to us one day and he said, I don't want any excuses. I don't care what anybody says. That's going to go front and center on the homepage now. He's like, put it up there, no login, no payment, just let them have access to it. And it needs to be the first thing they experience. No corporate speak, just let them actually live it. And so we did that, and it exploded. And it exploded way faster than we could have predicted. But it was that very much a make it real moment, right? So that's been the most powerful activation for us, is when you just kind of set it free and let the world have it. Now, the risk of that is you better be able to back up what you've been saying. And that's the trap of marketing, right? I see a lot of other AI accelerators talking about what they're capable of, but I don't see any developers or customers out there saying, yeah, we're blown away by it. And so when you put it out literally on Twitter and say, guys, play with it, and then you measure the comments and the feedback that they give you in a very public sphere, you hopefully have been very honest all along about your marketing. And, we had to protect that for these last several years. And that's probably been our most successful activation.
I, from my vantage point, would echo that. That decision by Jonathan to go all in on Groq
Yeah.
Chat, make it free, make
Yeah.
it open, is totally watershed.
Yeah.
And I've observed Groq, take this the right way, like benefiting from that moment.
Oh, 100%.
In not incremental growth, but truly explosive growth. It's amazing to watch how that has impacted you all. As we sort of round the river bend, I really was curious to hear from you about the role of community, the importance of community, because I see how Groq invests in the community, supports the community, and enables the community. What role does community building play in your vision?
Yeah, it's I think everything if you want to be a successful tech company in AI right now. If you don't build community, then you're probably not going to be very successful. And so this is where we've put more emphasis, obviously, and people think of it as a social media campaign, but really it's a community effort. And it works if you get it right. For example, you can build the whiz bang, amazing, greatest thing, but if people don't have the right support, the right resources, the right tools, and we're still struggling in some of those areas, we're maturing, we're evolving. But it's not about us, right? So I'll give you a good example. We had this explosion moment that in 10 weeks of giving Groq API access via Groq Cloud and Console out there to the world, in the last 10 weeks, we've had roughly 175 to 180,000 developers sign up and actually get API access. That has never happened in the history of developers with any product. It didn't happen for NVIDIA. It has never happened for anybody, right? That's insane. We have over 75,000 applications that are pinging our cloud system that are running today that people have either built from scratch or they've converted from OpenAI over to trying open source models on Groq. So I remember seeing an executive at Groq go out and he had put a slide together with these numbers on it. And it was like, we're amazing. Groq has done this. And I said, we've done nothing. And don't ever take that tone. They did that. The community did that. We gave them access to an amazing technology, but we didn't generate that number. They came together as a community and became that number. And I think that humility is very important for us to keep hold of at Groq as a part of our brand and our marketing. Yes, we're very proud of it, right? But that's not something for us to throw around in people's face like it's a muscle. We have a responsibility now to keep supporting those communities, keep providing them more compute, keep providing them cutting edge, open source models. So we feel a responsibility now, which is something you don't normally see in marketing, but you do see in community management and moderation. You now have a responsibility to these individuals. And I learned that when I was at Google. I ran moderation communities for Street View and Maps, and it takes a different position when you hear about what people are doing with the tech. When people talk about we're building an AI application that is going to help people that have accessibility challenges, or people that say, I want to have this application, this conversational AI that's going to help people with loneliness through a therapy bot and a therapy agent. This isn't about winning arms races anymore. This is about people that have true vision, that they depend on your technology to get their vision executed. So community now is everything for us. Our Discord server has, I want to say, over 35 or 40,000 people in it. And in there, they're having conversations with us every day about what they're building, where they're stuck, how do we help them. We actually just created a program called Groq Champs, and they get a little badge if they're answering enough questions for each other. We're giving those people free swag. We're inviting them to our events. And to celebrate community, we just did a public sector event, which was another Groq day. We actually had more developers there presenting their applications than Groqsters speaking about what we've built. And we said, you guys need to be there and show people what you're doing. And yes, is it powered by Groq? 100%. But what you're doing is what the government is what will help them accomplish their mission. So we want you guys there, not us. And that's a big part of the community engagement that we have now. And we're learning a lot from it.
Mark, enabling people to build, to create, this is, at the core, like helping the sum of the parts be, I'm going to butcher this, but the whole be greater than the sum of its parts.
That's right.
Love that. And I'm very excited. Many of us are very excited to see how this evolves for Groq, because I think the prevailing feeling is you guys are just getting started.
Very much so. Very much so. Yeah.
If somebody wanted to get in touch with you directly to, explore a potential partnership, help advantage the community somehow, provide resource, how can somebody reach out for a conversation like that?
Yeah, I think the best ways are some of the ones that I've mentioned today. Obviously, we're very active on social media, Twitter and LinkedIn especially. So if people want to DM us there, they definitely can. For those that are developers or around developers, join our Discord server. There's a link on the website that allows people to join that and take part in the conversation. Let us know what you're looking for and what you're trying to accomplish. And then, obviously I'm very active and present in all of those channels. I'm more so on the social side than the Discord side, but I am there as well. And they can reach out in any of those ways. And then obviously we're at a lot of events. We keep our event calendar public. So no challenges in finding us or reaching us.
Well, it's truly been a privilege to walk through things with you, Mark. But more than that, to have my eyes open, and I'm sure those who are going to watch and listen to this later will have their minds open even further about many of the things you said. So appreciate your insights. Your time is very grateful for it. So Mark Heaps, thanks for joining, and look forward to having a conversation again in the future.
Yeah, it's been fun as always. Thanks so much.